go ahead and get started, and if those of you on the phone will introduce yourselves, and then we'll go around the room so we can hear the voices, and then we'll get started with our agenda. First of all, those of you on the phone, do you have your materials?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
I've been out of state, so I'm kind of getting reconnected. So, Betty, I think you're on the phone.
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone.
Okay. Renee?
Hi, everyone. It's Renee from Klamath Falls.
No snow down there yet?
A little dusting on the hills. I'm coming.
Nina? Can you?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. And then here in the room, to my left, John Wood, Kristen Keeper, Sabrina Ursuland, Lisa Grotting, Susan Buttle,
Tom Udell,
Meredith Russell, and Danelle Dodson. So, welcome to this new winter day. Got used to having sun. I have not gotten used to having rain. But thank you for all of you who made time in your day to do this. As we were talking about Fridays are kind of a special day. To make time in your Friday is nice, and we appreciate that. Because oftentimes this is the day where you're trying to get everything else done that you didn't get done Monday through Thursday. So appreciate you sharing your time with us. So moving on with the agenda, we'll just move on. That's okay. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, first of all, I think many of you noticed that we sent out a notice. It is Friday, I can tell. That we've had, I think, 4 people that have gone on to different positions, and so consequently have had to leave the committee. And so we put out an advertisement to solicit other individuals' membership. And there was a question somebody raised, why were we doing that? Because we're moving right along. That's because we are moving right along, and we want to be sure that we assure that broad representation. And even though the standard, we're almost to that point, we still have a lot to do after we get the standard, because once we get the standard, then we have to build on that about the criteria and all of that. So we still have a lot to do, and we really want to be sure that we have that representation. And you probably noticed we wanted some representation from communities of color, as well as the CCR&Rs. I think we, for some reason, our quality improvement is where we seem to have had a lot of our people declare. So we want to put that quality back. We've had such a rich participation, we want to continue that. So, does that make sense? Okay. It also says we aren't going to be done by December, which we had originally kind of thought maybe we might be, but we're not. We'll go over the work plan, which takes us into the next year. We'll have a happy new year. Let's see, what else do I have on my notes about that?
And excuse me, Donald, we are recording the meeting, right, Kristen?
Yeah. Okay, just for folks to know we are recording. Try to ignore that. I think that's all that we wanted to be sure that we covered about membership. And then we did a brief update to the Early Learning Council about where we were. I really stressed to the council about the one page, and that we have the document, I called it the book, that supports that. Since that was an aha learning for me, that the standard is really a 2-page document, and then we have all the supporting materials. We did not have many questions, if any. I don't recall.
I think great support for the work, and really, I mean, they were really thrilled when we talked about the process that we've been through, and really felt like, you know, we'd taken what we had heard from the community and really had done some good, thoughtful work when Donalda shared with them kind of the process and where we were at.
They were real interested in whether or not we looked at the broad spectrum of ages, and especially school age, and we said, Susan was there, she was keeping us on our toes, and giving us tools that will help with that, and so they were pleased to hear that. I think the information that we've been doing about the professional development is really being well received as well. And looking at having these standards reflect community, and that's a real positive aspect. So anyway, I'm really pleased about that. So that's probably why I emphasize that myself. But they too were pleased to hear that. So if we aren't representing that broad spectrum, be sure and let us know, because we plan, we really depend upon the community and the committee to give us that, keep us on the right path. And with that, we're finalizing the standard framework. Ta-da! Meredith and Don. Do you want me to start, Don? Or? Okay. And we have the one-pager. Yeah. So hi, everybody. This is Meredith for folks on the phone. And so just a quick reminder of how we got here from the last time we met is many of you were kind enough to look at this and give us some specifics around wording. We had talked last time that wordsmithing is kind of important in this document because it's collapsing so much into something that's intentionally supposed to be really high level and really kind of a summary. And so we took a lot of your feedback, and TRI did, I think, a great job of incorporating a lot of different feedback into this summary document. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the pieces that came together, because I don't know that you all got to see each other's comments. So I would say probably the overall theme of the feedback that came back was being a little more explicit of the tiering, a little more explicit of the journey that it looks like from 3-star through 5-star, and that was done with just incorporating a couple of words as well as getting a little bit more explicit of the things that we've seen in what Donalda calls the book, all the criteria, highlighting that a little bit in here, and let me just give you some examples. So when we look at under learning and development, under the 5-star, you can see we added, I guess this is our 4 asterisk, to include at the 5-star level what some of those multiple sources might be to get at that 5-star learning and development. You can see what's listed there on assessments, et cetera, so that we're really calling out what is added at the 5-star level. And you can see that's pulled right from that deeper layer from the book that we've talked about. You can also see that in positive relationships. We got some comments about how do we show that increase and that deepening and broadening. And so at the 5-star level, they did a great job highlighting in the wording that, where maybe at the 3-star it's the adult-child interaction, at the 5-star we're going towards interactions all across the program. So it's not just adult-child interaction, it's interaction between the children. It's fostering positive interactions between the staff and the families, between staff and staff. So highlighting some of that in the words. Personnel qualifications, same thing, just adding a couple words like measurable to the substantial progress, clarifying what goes into the qualifications at the 5-star level, etc. A couple other things I wanted to highlight. It was suggested that we add the words developmentally appropriate into the learning and development domain because it's so foundational to everything that we would be looking at quality programs to do. So it was added in the 3-star level because once it's in the 3-star, we know it has to be there for the 4- and 5-star. And we talked about, I think that's one of those things like culturally responsive that we could easily put in every single one of these 15 boxes, 18 boxes. But it loses something if we put it in all of them, so we strategically are putting those concepts in the 3-star levels, knowing that then that implies it's across the board. And the titles, too, I think, like with family partnerships and family engagement, showing the depth. Yeah. Yeah. And then we clarified a little bit in the children's program safety and stability to show the tiering as well, and that at the 3-star level, there's that commitment and that meeting of the threshold, and then as the star levels increase, we're really looking at a demonstration that safety and stability has been consistent over time. So that's one that you as a group had some questions about that we really tried to put some emphasis on, to give more definition to the words, I guess you could say. And so, and I don't really think we had very many comments on that, so.
And that is an area, you know, as you'll see in the work plan, when we segue to there, that's something that we'll bring back to this group for your thoughts and input and expertise going down the road, but it's not the layers that the ELC will be getting. It'll be a layer deeper at another time. So, I think that those were the highlights. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions about process, things that they're seeing or not seeing? Does this look like what you were thinking and
Where we were heading, it's one of those things where every word really has a significance. The title has a significance as it grows, and then the word side has. It sounds strange to say, but it is.
Hey, this is Betty, and I just wanted to say that I really like the additions and the fine-tuning. I think it really narrows in on the message and the points we're trying to make, and I feel really good about the revisions and the way that it stands right now.
Thank you. Other comments? We did have a couple comments from people who couldn't be here that thought we were on track too, as well. I remember those. So, Pam, I remember because she's in Europe. I don't know why she didn't stay.
She went to Europe versus coming to the SMART ad hoc committee.
Yeah.
So I guess our high-level policy question on this agenda item is, do we have ad hoc support or a recommendation that this standard version is good to go for presentation to the Early Learning Council? I don't know if you would rephrase that as a policy question, but that's sort of the general gist of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think moving it forward to the council and then continuing to work on the book and building the rest of the system.
And then the asterisks are to help us be sure that the words that we've got there define what we wanted it to be. That's why we added the asterisks, to be sure we covered those that were covered in the discussion. So does this look good to you, Adam, too? I mean, all those in the trenches, it's important that, okay. Then I think if, given that, we can move this forward to the Early Learning Council.
I feel like we should like applaud or something.
I know. Well, we've come a long way with it.
What?
For afterwards.
Go on in her back. She better not.
Okay, so I guess we should do a thumbs up if we think that this is ready, so that I'm not just looking at people saying it. Are those think that we're ready to move this forward, give us a thumbs up? Okay. And, yeah, those of you on the phone, are you supportive of us moving this forward? Can you say aye or something?
Marina Wood gave a thumbs up.
Oh, good. Oh, that's right, I forgot. Any other thumbs up?
Yeah, thumbs up from Betty.
Okay, thank you. Nina? Aye, oh, good. Thank you. I just think on something this important, we should be sure that people are just not saying anything. Okay. A 2-page standard that says a book full of information. That's quite a feat. Think about it. It's quite a feat. Okay. So now that we've got this standard on which we're going to base all of this, now we look at Equity Implementation Committee feedback on targeted support.
All right, I think that's me.
It's you. That's why I'm Tom.
So Shauna Rodriguez presented the revision and prioritization resources that was presented here to the Equity Implementation Committee. Robin and I attended to help clarify any questions if we could. There weren't a lot of questions, but there was some good discussion. I think it was real positive for ERDC, and it was nice that there were several people there that understood ERDC, employment-related daycare, and how those the A, B, and C rate areas were developed and used and stuff, so they answered some questions around that. They talked about the population served by the program criteria was reviewed, and that's where they their discussion came out about including race and ethnicity to reach children of color as part of it, and to look at race and ethnicity as being added. There was a lot of discussion that they weren't really sure about the best way to gather the information, but that was probably one of the biggest outcomes out of the group as far as a recommendation, is they did feel that we should look towards providers, potentially collecting that information from the families that they serve as a way to use that information for prioritizing the resources that are available. And it did come up, and it was asked, we think it was too much of a burden to put on providers to collect that information, and they felt like potentially it wasn't. There was a recommendation that we continue to get input from some providers about that. There was a suggestion that it could be added to some standard documents that programs use for enrollment, such as documents that are recommended from Office of Child Care when you go through the initial orientation. There was a little bit of confusion about the difference between some documents that are available and recommended and what's maybe required, and so the discussion went around different ways of how you might require that, and it talked about the CACE, the food program. That used to be, yeah. Thank you for the help on that one. It's written down here somewhere, but I don't know where I thought, oh, I'll just read it right off to there and remember that. Anyway, the food program potentially collects that information. Maybe there's some models there, some information that we could glean there. But the recommendation was is that we really did need to look at including some measure that would show that we were reaching programs that were serving children of color in our prioritization of resources. There was also a little bit of discussion about looking at how you might build in looking at the provider too, and that we're reaching providers of color too, and look at collecting race and ethnicity data on providers as part of the criteria. When it came down to one of them that was a discussion was the service that's provided. We looked at one of the areas that would help prioritize programs would be the services they provided. Weekend care, odd hour care, evening care, infant toddler care were some of the things that were built into the proposal that we put in. So there was a suggestion there is that we get some additional family input about what their priorities would be and what they would want to use for priorities in that area to make sure those were. And then we have some specifics that we can take away that I don't know about some suggestions for parent groups that you could go to for input around some of this, and some ways of getting additional input from providers. So, any questions? I think overall one of the thoughts were that this could be something that could come back to them. They were very committed to the idea of providing good input and helping set direction in this area, but it seemed like there was more information to be gathered, or more concrete suggestions that would need to come back to them in the future about how the collection of race and ethnicity data and the use of that to prioritize would actually come out and be implemented.
So were there any requests from them, or just
us moving forward, that we could bring it back to them, and that we do look into considering that it wouldn't be too big of a burden for providers to collect that information, and look for a strategy to do that, and then look for a way to build that into the prioritization, and then possibly engage them again to look at that after we're
wonder if you can start with, you know, what everybody that's on a food program. I mean, that is already there, but then, and then just do the providers that are not using food programs. Seems like it'd be easier to get that full, thinking of my paperwork, like my enrollment, I don't have that on my enrollment at all. You know, it's never, I mean, I do like my, you know, critical promise stuff and my food program stuff, but my regular enrollment has never been part of my enrollment process, collecting the staff.
Would that be hard to add? I'm like,
No, I mean, no, yeah, mine's all, you know, for that I can just add it, but I think it'd be easier because the food program would have all that information already for me. That would be there, and then, because that would be on every single one of my kids, and then I wouldn't have to do it.
I wonder about two things. One, whether the food program collects that data in the same format that the state is looking at. I think that the federal piece is not as expanded as what the state piece is. But it might be a start. But then I also think about the forms that are up for Office of Child Care that are possibilities for enrollment that I know when I was a center director, that was my go-to, and putting that information on those, and then sharing with providers that that's a possibility for a resource for them to go to until they can update their own forms, or maybe a cut and paste section that they can stick into their own form that's in the format that we want to collect that information in.
Susan?
I'm concerned about the food program data, I've never done it in a child care center, but I've served after school meals and I've served summer meals. And but then through the training to be able to offer those. And when we collect ethnicity data, we're expected to look around the room and count people and categorize them as we think they look visually. And I don't know if that's how CACFP works too, but I think that's problematic to use that data because I think it should be self-reported. Yeah, CACFP does it the same way. Yeah. It's very self-reported, you're supposed to guess, and I agree. It's not.
Well, our forms are parents have to sign, so I have my parents look like all, when I populate it, I put in what I think it is, but then if it needs corrected, my parents correct it.
Okay.
So those for my forms are accurate,
Yeah.
because the parents have to sign our forms, it's not that we can just.
Well, assuming we include the school age data in this. Just to know that people are guessing.
Yeah.
At that point.
I have a question for you, actually, since you also work with school aid. So in our program, we actually use the free and reduced form that school aid use for all children. And doesn't that collect that information on that? So we use that for all of our children. We don't have a food program. That's just a way for us to collect information and then figure out how to charge tuition for the peers that are in our program. So would that collect that information?
I'm not sure.
I think it does. I should probably know that, but
I think it does that as a parent.
I think it does, and the parent fills it out.
Well,
So you could have them
my
as a part.
context of serving summer meals is very different because
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
getting people who are not necessarily enrolled in school.
Yeah.
So it's a little different.
So we use it for every single one of our children. So, and I'm pretty sure that that's on there.
Yeah.
So just an idea.
Well, it's interesting because we're using SNAP data for data. So it's interesting if we would use the program form as a format for collecting information.
Yeah, well, the CACFP does make that an option for parents, but they do say if the parent didn't fill it out, you need to make your best guess, and that's very uncomfortable.
I totally object to that.
Mm-hmm.
Have to be somebody that's different ethnicity.
Absolutely.
And in the stuff that came out of the Equity Implementation Committee, it's very clear, stated a couple different places, that they're talking about collecting this information from families, and they have that same concern that it, so it's a clear recommendation from the Equity Implementation Committee that it has to be
Right.
self-report data from the family.
As a provider, I would be totally for it. I mean, I don't think it's a burden or anything like that. I think, or even if you guys came up with a form and I just have my parents fill it out, send it in or something like that, I think it would be very.
Well, because it will help us to be able to be reflective of the community that you're serving and help us with some of these standards.
so nice to be able to say the providers are reflective of the communities they're serving and look at the diversity of the communities that we're serving. So we don't need to do anything more about this other than an implementation, or how do we move this forward?
Well, it sounds, I mean, I think we shared what the equity committee gave us. We've gotten your feedback and thought, and so I think as we move forward, we take that all into consideration, and you should see that, you know, some of this conversation reflected in it, right?
Yeah, again, especially in our professional development, I think this is both one issue that we're reflecting that too. Good.
So just, I'm going to take notes since Sean is not here, so I just kind of want to reflect back what I'm hearing and make sure that that is accurate. So I guess our policy question for you folks would be, given the Equity Implementation Committee sort of answering the question that we all had, which is we wanted to make sure that this was a racial equity lens and not just a poverty lens, and that it would it be too much of a burden to ask providers to do this? And I think we're hearing from Equity Implementation, no, this is the right direction to go. So with that, does this committee support us moving forward in doing more work to bring back to you about the message there? Okay, we're getting head nods in the room. Phone folks, are you comfortable with us moving forward then with this model?
I might add that it should be self-reported.
Yeah, so thank you. And those were the kind of the 3 points that I heard today. One was make sure that we have a way to families to self-report. I'm also hearing a little bit of like a no wrong door data piece, and that some of you may have, depending on your programs, that you're already collecting this from families, or there's other ways. So we would want to maybe make sure that there was some flexibility in the method, that if you're already collecting this, we're not going to say, oh, sorry, you have to use this form for STARK. So to be thinking of that. And then the other piece that I'm thinking about is making sure that we as the system are providing support to providers to do this, whether it's, you know, providing forms and templates that they could use, or making sure we're really clear in supporting, training, informing providers on how to do that with families, of how to ask, how to collect it from families, et cetera, so there's that support built in. So
or what they can be using, like they could use their CACF.
Yes, yeah, so that this is a supported shift. So, yeah, so with those thoughts, yeah, go.
Oh, I was gonna say, and you also said about providers, doesn't the oral reflect all that? Yeah.
No, we don't.
Yeah, oral
Oral.
has race and ethnicity data
Fine,
in it.
provide,
Yeah.
not child level data.
Yeah.
But
Oh, and yeah.
Yeah, there was that
About
piece
the provider,
that
that
talked
was
about-
already.
The piece that talks about providers, I'm sorry, I was
Yeah.
still off on.
So you'd be able to take your oral list of your providers and match it with your populations you're serving.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's
Great.
what, I think we've got, it's optional, so we've got, is it about 70%
Yeah,
of providers?
really, so have reported on, and I think that as the online version comes up, it'll help even increase that reporting.
I guess a couple things that I would throw in is it does seem like this data is being collected, so there's a high level decision about how the data is aggregated and used, that may need to come into play.
Okay.
And then another question that's not explicitly answered that didn't come out of this is then how it's built in as a prioritization criteria going into the future. And it seems like a fairly high level, you know, the collecting of the data, who collects it, where it goes, if it gets aggregated somewhere, it's a fairly high level question, I think.
And I just want to mention that Renee agrees with the self-report idea along with other collection options.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think those thoughtful questions that we had 2 or 3 months ago helped with this. I mean, they did it together because you asked those questions and then we were able to pursue that with this information.
So on our end, this is separate from we collect this data. But what we have, and I pulled up an example of what our form looks like, is that we have just a form what we call family information. And we ask the parents to fill out the top boxes, and it has ethnicity, race, and then we ask military status. So we ask to those 3 specific questions, and then we give them the option to fill it in for each one of their children as well.
I think the question that I had as we look at all the different forms that are happening is that we ran into some of our partner programs having a shared application, and Head Start collects race and ethnicity data different than Preschool Promise collects it, different than what Preschool Promise is required to report on the quarterly reports, and just making sure that if programs are collecting it differently, that there's guidance on how to roll it into the federal standards, so we're not doing it differently, and making sure that there's that option for parents to not report if they don't want to report, and that's part of what's really clear, I think, because since the ACFP does it the way they do it, and they require a provider to guess, that there's clear guidance from us that says that's not what we're after. Parents are allowed to not answer, and you don't have to guess as a provider. I think, both of those pieces are really important to make it all.
On our Head Start and like the form I have here, like if we're doing an enrollment visit, because this is just for our program data, not CACSP, if the parent leaves it blank, then it's put back on us to make that circle. And so our advocates are really there to try to make sure they're filling it in, but we don't have the option to say.
Yeah, and when we did race and ethnicity, it's a half-page paper of options for parents to choose, and that's not what the federal pieces are, so that's some really clear guidance. Not for people promise.
And some forms don't have the biracial, option, and parents want to be able to have that, so, or try it. So, it sounds like we do really support this concept. We really want to, this is another one of those family voices type things that we really want to stress, but that we do have some things to be sure that we're considerate of.
I think it'll be interesting too of how we inform families of what it's being used for as well. Thinking about that and thinking, are there unintended consequences of if it's being used to, however it's being used, that there's not unintended pressure on families to report. Things like that.
There's a lot of fear about immigration and deportation and those kinds of things. I think whatever guidance documents get put out need to help folks address that.
Yes.
And it truly is a choice.
And that might be the message we take back to the equity committee, to stress the choice, because there are programs, I know when I was in the WIC program, they used to say the same thing, you can just say so. I said, you're not going to tell me what my ethnicity is. I'm going to tell you, don't guess my ethnicity.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think that's something we want to have stressed, and that really supports what we've been doing with the standard with those families. It would be good if other entities stress the same thing, so that we're not the lone voice. Anything else, Tom?
No, I think.
So our next steps, we'll move this forward and take some of these comments back, to the equity committee, I think, and then incorporate it in our future activity standards. Moving right along. I have my work agenda, and then I have the real agenda, so I keep going back and forth, and I have my notes on it. Okay, our work plan, we're ready for the work plan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, do folks, everybody on the phone have the copy of the work plan in front of them?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. So what we did was we took basically the work plan that you folks have seen and that we've been working on already, and then guesstimated the topics that we both wanted to bring back to you and things that we wanted to bring newly to you. And I can just say, in doing this work, it was actually a really exciting and fun task to do, because you folks have been so helpful in this. And I do believe your charter said something like 12 to 18 months, so I'm thinking, great, let's go with 18. We want to keep it through. But these dates are really just guesstimates, so we're hoping to talk together today and make sure that we've created some sort of a reasonable framework for time frame as well as topics we wanted to add back. So I think the first thing I wanted to do was look at the quote old section, which is pages 1, 2, and 3. And just have everybody kind of think through what we've done so far and see where we're at with the time, what this is looking like. And I did have one significant question, which was about best beginnings, which I couldn't answer. We had on there that we were going to take a briefing to them in August, and I'm not sure if that happened. No. And if that's something that we need to rethink about at some point in the future.
I wonder if it might make more sense, particularly around the infant, toddler, like as the book gets fleshed out, if that might be a good time to kind of take it from that 0 to 3 lens.
Okay.
Maybe.
That would be a good time. Because there's stubborn, they didn't have a meeting. I'm on best beginning. You are, okay, right. So whenever we need to, I can take that, but we didn't meet this week because of conflicts, and we're trying to figure out when we can meet next month. Okay. So that's something you could maybe take back and let us know. When we're ready. Okay. So I don't know if anybody had any comments or questions kind of about where we've been. Well, it's impressive where we've been. I mean, this reflects a lot of work. So as you can kind of see at the bottom of page 3, we had lumped a lot into oversee implementation of Spark. And so what I wanted to do in pages 4 and 5 is really make sure that we are, again, bringing back some things to this committee as well as adding things. And as you've heard us say before, I think those of us a little more in the weeds really think about the 5 components of Spark, and the standard is one of those, which hopefully we're kind of coming to a close on this high level piece. But then there's the other components, which are the supports, the financial incentives, the consumer engagement, the rating, et cetera. So as you can see, we definitely want to bring supports and incentives back and do that sooner rather than later with some of the discussion we've had today, and to really hammer out how that's going to actually be implemented. We want to bring back a deeper level dive around compliance, which is the safety and stability thresholds, and what that looks like a little more specifically, and bring those to you for your thoughts. There's a whole component of monitoring, which is that rating and accountability piece, which has not really been part of our current iteration of Spark beyond what we're able to track with compliance. And so we're looking at doing a pilot of that, utilizing licensing specialists who are already the boots on the ground in the programs that have relationships with these programs to begin to collect data on which components of Spark are being maintained or not. And so we'd really like your input on that, both to bring to you what we're doing with the pilot for your thoughts, and then bring to you some data of what that pilot is telling us. Universal technical assistancing, this was something that came out as a very strong high-level recommendation early on in the Spark revision, to think about how do we make that, accessible all types of quality improvement support regardless of where the program is on their journey, and particularly as we think about having some of that much more accessible electronically, which we know will be greater access for many providers, but not all. It's certainly not a panacea, but to bring to you some policy questions around what and how we're getting things out universally and what resources those are. The rating, we want to bring back to you the whole concept of how this all boils down to, and how it boils down to star pieces or star ratings that we want to bring back. And then I think these next 3 are really things that we want to look at doing ongoing, and you can see they're in a lot of different months. The Spark transition that's something I think we want to start talking about right away. And we've touched on it a little bit here. What is the messaging that's going out to the field? How are we transitioning? What's that going to look like in terms of, what do we call it, no un-grandparenting? So folks not losing stars or being demoted in their stars regardless of what these are, et cetera, and just making sure that we are covering all our bases for a really successful transition with people. Same with community engagement. That's something that's been ongoing. That's something that's going to continue to be ongoing and really helping you folks, I think, hold the implementation and hold us accountable for doing a very good job of continuing that feedback loop and going back to the field to say, hey, here's what we've been hearing from you for the last 1.5 to 2 years. Have we hit the mark in terms of making those changes? And the measuring outcomes as well. There's been voices on this committee that have been extremely, I think, enlightening for me and for us in terms of how do we know that we're hitting the mark with our higher level vision of equity and Spark and accessibility and Spark. How are we going to continue to bring back to this committee to hold us accountable? Yes, we're doing this. Yes, we're getting to these populations. Yes, we're meeting our goals. So you can see that's something that's going across the months as well. And then I have continuous quality improvement twice on page number 5 in different months. So clearly it's really important, and I need to go back and do that. I think that would probably not be the July piece, but sooner. We had talked about how that is such a foundation for this model of a QRIS, and I think it does tie in a little bit with the universal technical assistance piece. So coming back and talking about what those plans look like, what the resources are, how it gets implemented, how accessible is it, because that's going to be a pretty big shift of really opening that continuous quality improvement phase to a greater diversity of providers across the continuum of care and what that really looks like, and how do we use the CQI plan and process to highlight things that we know are really important for children and child outcomes that aren't appropriate necessarily to capture in the standards at the high level, but we still want to be really baked into this whole framework that Oregon's adopting. And then finally, this concept of endorsements, which was something that came out really, really loud and clear in the feedback that we've done over the last 1.5 years around how do we make sure that we're capturing program strengths and programs' uniquenesses, but again, it's things that don't really fit within the standards, but that's something that programs want to show that they feel they're doing well, both in terms of their own uniqueness and their values around what they're doing, but also in terms of, Janelle, the point you always bring us back to with that parent voice and choice, that if it's really, and I'm just going to pull out a random example, if it's really important to a parent that that this program is doing a lot of outdoor experiences and natural world experience, et cetera, that's something, if a program is maybe certified to do through another organization or something they've prioritized, how do we build in a way that a program can have an endorsement or a badge or a way of communicating that that highlights that. And that's something that programs were really felt was important, and I think also helps to bring in a diversity of pedagogies. That was something we heard from the field, of making sure that Spark is applicable to that diversity of pedagogies. But when we started to dive in the detail, was really tricky around how do we do that, who does that, what melds in with best practices and research versus something that just a program's doing, but that maybe doesn't meld into best practices and research so clearly. So I think there's a lot of interesting details to be discussed about how we make this align with our overall vision. So that's just a really quick run through. So I guess our high level policy questions to you folks is there content in here that either we're missing or doesn't accurately reflect the way that we want to be going for implementation? And secondly, any thoughts on timing and order of these? So those would be the two questions I would have, content and then kind of timing and order.
Meredith, the last time we met, we started talking about adult-child interaction tools, and that was a good discussion. It felt like a good starting point. Where do you see that in there?
I don't know that I do. Do you see it in here, or do you feel it's something we should add as an additional block?
outcomes, but that's really on measuring the outcomes of Spark and not of what programs are trying to achieve.
Yeah.
It could be in continuous quality improvement, potentially it could be in supports and incentives, because there needs to be a lot of support around
Both of those, like reading, and then the
Training.
training.
But it seems like it's in all three of those. The rating is the end product, the quality is what you're trying to build, and then the technical assistance is helping to get it out to people.
Right.
That makes sense.
That was that's potentially such an expensive and intense endeavor. So I think we should talk about it more.
I love it. That makes a lot of sense. Do folks feel it makes, that it raises it to the level of importance it is to build it into some of these other topics, or do we feel it needs to be called out as a separate topic to make sure we hit it? What's the best way to go about it?
I'm sorry, this is Betty. I didn't quite hear what the topic was that we're talking about.
Sorry, adult-child interaction. Susan was just reflecting on the good conversations we've had about it and the importance in terms of outcomes, as well as the resources that it takes for the system and providers to do it.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that it is a really important topic, but I don't know that I don't know that we need to pull it out as its own like row in this table. I think that the important thing to do would be to build in enough times during those areas like rating and outcomes, and I think I heard quality, build in enough time in those segments so that we can address that particular subtopic to the extent that we think it deserves.
I'm wondering if we should check with the implementation team about when they're going to be kind of building that into their process to sort of know when to add it into ours.
Good point. Other thoughts about that?
Yeah, just a good morning from Chelsea.
Good morning, Chelsea.
I just have a question about, just thinking about how this is rolling out to the field and the CCR&R is providing that to providers. I know there's been a lot of question on providers' part. There was a message really that came out that said, hey, this is all changing by the end of the year. Clearly, we're not in revision 2 in December. Wondering if we can talk a little bit about where we see that playing in with these conversations and possibly having a message that can go out to providers in the field, because there is a lot of question about what are we doing now? And I think that needs to be addressed, especially if we want to continue to have buy-in into this. If we leave people hanging, they're going to start to check out.
When we talked about early kinds of things, but then we haven't been able to, because I know I keep saying, it's coming, it's coming.
I know.
I look to staff to see what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm shaking my head up and down, I agree. And I think even getting this work plan flushed out, kind of knowing where we're at can help us get some messaging with a little more, some concrete timelines would be my hope. And so I think it's great. We need to do that.
Yeah, I support that. I'm still out visiting programs and talking to people, and in some ways I feel like a Spark ambassador. Like, it's this is the direction it's going. These school age programs, they've been listening to you. You're reflected. You know, it's really like exciting. They don't know that yet, and they should.
You have programs that start to get excited about it, but then they're being told, well, we don't have a new training yet. We don't know what we're supposed to be telling you to do. There's just these mixed messages, especially for new providers and providers that are interested in quality improvement, where they're kind of in limbo. And we did have a really nice conversation about, do we put some of this information out now? Do we give them something that they can work on? I think even in the absence of that, we could make a statement about this is when it will be and have
try to have some good concrete ideas, so people can have that and hold on to it.
And Autumn, not to put you on the spot, however, as we've been doing some oftentimes you'll say, oh, I already do part of this in my program already, just like our discussion about the CACFC. So you're already seeing how some of the things that we're doing, you can already weave into your current practice. It seems like that's what we need to help others see, that, oh, maybe that whole document's not here yet, but I can see things that I can start putting in place so that when it happens, I'm ready to go.
I think an update to like when this very first started, like when QRIS very first started, there was a sheet, like a one-pager that said, you can start doing this. So I think an updated one-pager, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess I feel like there's a little bit of a vacuum of what information is out there when there was this announcement. At first, they had to have their portfolios turned in by June, and then that kind of came and went, and so there's
an update of what.
There's too much wondering, I think, and that we need to provide some
direction for this.
something.
And that everybody's on the same page,
Yeah.
all the providers, all the FMRs,
Yeah.
everything's on the same page. So I think if we had like a one-pager and update, or like for the new providers, I think we were thinking about waiving that length of time or whatever, these are the things that you can be working on to get things ready, so when this does roll out, you'll have these ready. Because a lot of people, especially I know a lot of providers around Christmas time take that time off and work on paperwork, so I think if we have something sooner than later for them to be thinking of,
It's even good guidance for the HUS. I'm in particular thinking about a critical promise classroom that I've got that's on a waiver for QRIS, and they're saying, do I do the old one? Do I wait? What am I supposed to do? And I don't even have good guidance for them.
We
So-
do have a messaging document.
Hey, this is Betty, and I'm getting a lot of the same questions from center directors in my organization and quality leaders, like, should we wait to apply? Should we just go forward with the old one? Like, what do you want? So I'm having the same question, and I think also I wanted to call out, I don't have our guiding principles from the Early Learning Council like right in front of me, but I feel as though transparency is something that's called out, either explicitly or implicitly in that. And so that idea is really in line with what we're talking about in terms of getting something out there to sort of take the field along for the ride on this. And I think it's the right thing to do.
So I was going to mention that we do have, I think it would be, you're talking a level of detail and some ongoing transparency that I think would be great, and it'd be great even possible that some of it may come from this group. I don't know if that's what you're suggesting. But we do have a frequently asked questions document that's ready, prepared to go out. It's going to start going out in any of the communications that we have with providers through portfolios, ready to be already in the system and out to the CCR&Rs. Because one of the big questions that we've been asked is, when my current QRIS rating expires, then what happens to me? Do I lose my star? So we explicitly answered that question with giving some information about that you'll be transitioned in, and we're saying there'll be at least a 6-month transition period where you'll have the opportunity to transition into the new stuff if yours is ending. But you will keep your star rating until your period ends. It's on your certificate. If it ends before the new Spark rollout, it will be extended at least 6 months into the new Spark rollout, is one of the questions that we answered in that document. It also has strong encouragement with go ahead and participate now in the field test version of Spark that's available to everyone, because if you get your rating in there, it'll continue for the time that you have it, and things are available and people should be moving. So that communication has been put together and will be able to be used. It's gone through our implementation team and been vetted by some directors and stuff.
I have one quick, I think that would be helpful for all of us to know. But you also said that if they're going to expire, if their star is going to expire, they can get an extension up to 6 months. Does our timetable match that?
What we had said is we said that they would have at least a 6-month transition, so it left it open.
Okay.
So it's not that it's,
We don't want to leave people
yeah,
hanging.
it's not that we
because
did not put any specific
And I just wanna, in the chat box, there's, Renee is agreeing that there's a lot of missed messages out there. And, you know, some of the wives are in the process to get going now because they think it might be harder. 6 months is only 3 months for school based on the program. It doesn't operate in the summer. So I think a lot of the same sentiment out there to get that information out. And I'm thinking of Autumn, what you talked about, like we have the top 5 things you can do, document, that when we were piloting in the 4 areas of so the rest of the state. And so I think,
Yeah, I think there were like a monthly one-pager or something that came out to the rest of everybody that were things that you could do and some information, and I was always hungry for that, like, when is it coming? Because I want to start working on, and I think that it's hard for programs that want to work on this but don't want to go in a wrong direction, or, and they do worry about if I put together the whole portfolio and then it's different, have I just wasted time that I could have been doing other things?
yeah. Very fair, very.
So could we see that we have an update sheet like you did before, and then with the Q&A? Would that seem like that goes together?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can bring some messaging, seeing how it teases out. You know, I think once you start putting something, it might look a little different than that, but I think it would be good to get this group's input since you guys are hearing from the field to see if it resonates and if there's any other questions. And maybe we could kind of do it ahead of time so that we can kind of get some quick,
We could do like we did before with your comments.
yeah,
About that.
yeah.
Standard update.
And I mean, I really hear this point that we need to be doing more messaging and more frequent messaging. And I think that's kind of where I was going with this transition, row.
Where my whole question started.
Yeah, and I guess part of me, I mean, at the risk of, overcommitting, I guess I feel like I would like us to commit even further to you folks. I think at this point where we do have a few things a little more nailed down, I think we should commit to at least a monthly provider-facing communication. I mean, I pick monthly just because that seems like a natural and doable thing, and we've got a lot of mechanisms out there to do that. And so I'm feeling like we need to commit a little deeper to you folks to do that, which means I think a lot of times we'd be able to bring the messaging to you ahead of time, but not necessarily because it's just the flow. So that, and you know, the tricky thing, I mean, just to be totally transparent, I think the tricky thing is when we're in development, we want to be so cautious about what we say so that we don't end up backtracking. It kind of gets into our discussion about rolling revisions. Like, that could be a nightmare, right? To say this, oh no, then this has changed. So being able to do that, but I think we need to really commit and have you hold us accountable to getting that monthly thing out. And there's been, I think some of what we'll want to do is tease out a little bit about what's been going out, and if it's not being heard, like TRI has a newsletter that goes out to providers. I don't know, is it monthly, quarterly? But it was fairly recent, that had a lot of detail in that. We've been providing information to the CCRNRs and in other webinars and things, but clearly if it's not getting to the field, it's not getting to the field. So I think some of that was very intentionally to the field, but if they're not hearing it, we need to go back and rethink.
Was that another box on here about ongoing communication? I mean, that's not something that.
Maybe some of that is being really intentional about asking the CCRNR to make sure that information ends up in the hands of providers, because I'm not sure that all providers are connected in with the CRI quarterly newsletter. So being just that really intentional, this is a message that we want to have providers hear, and knowing what the best routes are for that. And I'm assuming that's the CCRNR or licensing or both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the union will post it on, a lot of providers are on Facebook, different Facebook pages. A lot of them are just talking on Facebook. A lot of police providers aren't in those systems.
Right.
So, but maybe for K-12 somehow. K-12 or app, you know, there's a lot of people that aren't classically engaged.
Right, because I think a lot of it is there's those middle ground messengers
like the quality improvement specialist. So if TRI has done a lot of work in getting messaging to these quality improvement specialists about what these transitions, changes, messages are, then we want to make sure that that message is.
So example of our area, we're in new contract and we don't, except for me, and I'm not out with providers, there's not anybody delivering those messages. So, and I'm assuming that there's at least one other service delivery area that's in the same place, so.
I might make a suggestion, because I do think, in terms of the policy level discussion that we have here, if, probably, it might be good for us to flesh out somewhat like a communication plan about this, to make sure that we have the players, and then the messaging is really kind of what we hear from you first. I think reviewing the messaging, and after I said that, is not necessarily the use for this group, to do, but to help make sure that we're being accountable to the messaging and getting it to the right people is, I think, would be a good use of this group to help us make sure we're not just, you get in your habits of who you talk with, and we need to break sometimes those habits, so.
And really, adhering to the principles that we've kind of talked about here with the standards. I mean, we've talked about the family voice, being sure that there's appreciation of professional development. I think there are lots of things that are there. But as Dawn pointed out on our work plan, we have messaging.
Under the transition.
Yeah, the transition, yes. But it seems like that's ongoing, not just. And the other thing that I wanted to point out for the committee is, as you see, we're at the policy level. Every one of those has to do with what we're doing about the policy component. And so as we talk about the policies, then it's kind of like some of the things rain down from that, some of the messaging, but we can still address the policy, and then as subsets of that come out, like for the messaging, then you guys can take that and give it out. But some things I think I would love to get out to people, such as you don't have to be working on a 3-star to be able to participate in the program. Because I think that people who are putting portfolios together or asking the questions are doing that because they think, oh, I want to be at such and such. But we want to get to those individuals who say, oh, that's too much for me, but there is something for me. And we have not gotten that message out to them, to my knowledge. And we want them to be able to participate in some activities.
I think it's important to tell programming too that continuing on in the existing system is not a bad thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's a lot that have this under revision that something was wrong with the old version. While there were things that were problematic, it's not a bad system, right?
Right.
It's not bad work to do for your program. So
I think there's also some impression out there that if you do the work under the old program, you're going to be working a whole lot harder than if you wait for the new program. And so there are a lot of people out there that are going, I'm waiting, I'm doing it.
Some truth.
I know, Meredith, you ran this work plan by me, and maybe I didn't quite look at it, or I was just thinking through the conversation, I thought of a couple things. We'll go with that answer.
It's that collection.
Oh, do you have something? I have one that I brought up before, and I'm just wondering where the actual book of renewal policies comes in. Because I know in our program, that's one thing that we are looking at, because we're constantly asked, what our star rating is for various aspects of our program. And I can go in and tell fiscal, I know that on this date, our star expires, but we don't know anything. I mean, we know that there'll be this new system, but what does renewal actually mean? Having to completely resubmit, or will there be like a renewal application type process we go through, or are we going to be rebuilding portfolios? So really knowing what renewal is going to look like.
Thank you for that. That is something that's under the monitoring. We have a monitoring
I
system.
put it under there, wondering if
That's it. And so I will expand that a little bit. Thanks for bringing that up, because it's a lot more than just on the ground monitoring. It's renewal, it's annual report. So I will add that. Thank you.
that's where I put it, because I thought, well, monitoring, making sure that it's throughout the year. I'm assuming that monitoring throughout the year or years would be making sure that we're staying in licensing,
staying within our guidelines, but also that extra piece of.
Thank you.
So does this mean that by February, we will have a process for renewal? Or do we need to separate them? That's.
Yeah.
I went one step further, because I thought that's.
We just added to one, maybe the shift another.
Yeah. Can I think about that? I think what I'd like to do is just call out some of these other monitoring processes in the task, and then I have to think a little bit more about when each of the processes might be.
So then that helps us know where our goals are for the.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great message, going back to the messaging into the community, because I know that there are programs that are, renewal dates are coming.
Yes,
And so then they're on the question of, how do I even renew? Like, we know getting into the program, go and apply, but then, we're back to that messaging, being able to send that.
Was somebody on the phone trying to, or maybe it was just, shuffling papers, I just heard a little crackle, so I just wanted to check in. Meredith, the one thing I was thinking is under rating, I wonder if we should call out crosswalk.
Oh, good.
Because the first, what is that from national accreditation, Head Start, we had family child care accreditation, I'm not sure we've thought about how we're looking at that. The other one that I was thinking of that we talked about in this group is the consumer education and what is going to be shared with families about a rating.
Does that,
I think that's a whole nother line.
I think that doesn't seem like it goes with the same type of messaging.
Yeah, it was a kernel of the Spark transitions, but there's so much in that it probably does make sense to call that out more specifically.
It's kind of like one.
Really specific to families, Dawn.
Yeah, that's right, what's gonna be on the website, how are we gonna talk about it, what do we give to programs,
Some of that is what we give to programs so they can message their families.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Great.
Again, I think that speaks positively to the two-page standard, because if I were, looking for childcare, and I wanted to look at what are the standards in Oregon for childcare, you don't have to go through Reams. You can see here, and you can see the progressive approach.
And just connecting to that, I think that's part of consumer engagement, is how do we make this a family-facing document? This is an ELC-facing document, but how do we take these concepts and make them family-facing and translatable and translated?
That's why I think the wording helps in that, because it's progressive. I mean, you can see the progressiveness of it. Our consumers are very smart when it comes to our childcare and what they want. Okay, so now do we make some adaptations, and then you've got some things you're going to think about, and then this would be something probably that we all want to kind of cogitate about and look at, and then put it back on our agenda in December. That's good.
Yeah, and I guess, my hope is that this is a working document,
Yes.
and that, even if we or all of us have it in front of us, kind of ongoing at each meeting to make sure that we're capturing these and bringing those high-level policy questions so that, like to Dawn's point, about some of the messaging, is that we're getting high-level guiding principles for you, and we might be continuing to take this out on a monthly basis, not that you need to review it every month, but then this is kind of our guiding document to make sure we've taken all these topics to you all at a high level.
Other things? Other comments about this? And we identified that the child and family interaction that we brought up is embedded in these others.
Yes, I'm going to call them out, yeah.
And we've added the consumer education. We've added the word renewal to monitoring, and you're going to look at that. And then the crosswalk to rating.
in QRIS about, for some of these programs, whether it's community preschools or Head Start, who are, kicking children out of their programs, or putting them on reduced days, or requiring parents to come in so that their children, can actually stay in the program, the parent has to come. So the state is really looking at that, about how do we provide professional development to some of these, organizations or entities, and then, so they're collecting data on all of that to be able to look at this with pupils and Head Start. So if you're a 5, right, so my question is, if you are a 5, but yet you kicked 5 children out in 3 months, right, like, is there gonna be some kind of, way to capture that data that will be also captured in the rating? I guess what somehow there's gotta be some alignment. I know it's a really hot topic at the state level. So, yesterday, about, somebody said, well, maybe through the QRIS that will capture that, right? And so they'll be able to figure out about professional learning for some of those, Head Start to preschool. Am I making sense? I think that's gotta be, I'll just be really honest, in September, we've had 6 children with disabilities. 6. So I think somehow, out of Head Start. So I think somehow that needs to be, I don't know where that comes in here, but I know there's gotta be some kind of alignment in here somewhere in that rating.
I think it's a really, no, Lisa, I think it's a really, great point and something for us to think about. I mean, I know within the CCDF state plan, we need to have a social emotional or a expulsion policy,
Right.
or how we address it.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a difference between Head Start and the private marketplace.
Right.
But how that connects, I think, is gonna be important when we think about the standards. I don't know if it'd be in, positive relationships or learning and development, probably it's positive relationships, the social emotional, that it will be really good to think about that and making sure that those are connecting, because, I mean, I think the Head Start's a little different piece because I didn't think they were supposed to.
You're not.
Well,
It amazes me that they're allowed to, when, I mean, even public school does it, but as a childcare, we have, like, I had to go through hell and back before I was able to mutually make an agreement for one of my children to play, which will let me get the parent thing with the preschool promise child, you know. I can't just say, and that's where we're having as providers, we're having, especially as a preschool promise provider, we have these guidelines, but if it was our own child care, there's a different level. You know, I mean, we had to mutually basically say, with Willamette and these things, it is okay for this child not to be programmed, for everybody to be on board, not to get, I mean, we don't exclude kids, we don't kick them out, we have to live through it every single day, and it amazes me that this is allowed in early child care.
It's not allowed in Head Start, it's a no in Head Start.
Well, so it's really, it's kind of a national problem, not
Yeah.
a state problem, but they are using different language to get around it. Sometimes they can't come back, but
That's what I,
placement,
right.
but everybody knows what that means, right? When you've been there 5 days, you need to change placement. So we all know, and I guess just that if some of these programs probably, how do I say this correctly, politically? Some of these programs may have a 5-star, but if you look at the data, right, and they've picked out 3 kids in, 1 month's time, where there's a disconnect there. So I think somehow, I don't know where it needs to be, but I know I know a lot of people are hoping that this is gonna help with that. So all I can tell you, so.
I just need a 5-star provider, I don't see where that would get captured in this, that.
I don't either, and I think the thing that I struggle with is that, it's a very challenging thing. I also would call out that in some of our rural communities, there are no services for those children, and there is no support for those providers. Okay. And I do think at times you create a bigger disservice if you leave a child in a program with no support for the provider or the child it's a very sticky one. So I don't see how it's addressed in what we've got. If we do choose to address it here, I would want to be sure that in addressing it, we're also looking at what's available in the community for families and providers in terms of support. And I mean, it's
procedure within the program before a child is removed. Because some Head Start programs have like a very lengthy process, and they have to go through each step before that can actually take place.
So that's back to that adult child. Just like,
Well, I don't know if it would be totally addressed there either, because as an adult child, the provider can do as much as she can, even with that, with both ways, if the supports aren't there. You really, yeah, it's easy to have a classroom of, okay, well, let's just get rid of this kid, and the perfect classroom.
Well, and there are some struggles too, and that there's inclusive childcare program is available to support providers, but if that child's in a Head Start program, that child's in a preschool promise program, inclusive childcare program cannot support them. And it expects that those programs have enough supports there anyways, and that's not necessarily always the case.
We had well, our ESC was just at my house yesterday doing an observation. We have wanted to since last September of 2016, and it's taken this long with working with the parents. It was just yesterday. So,
And sometimes they still don't qualify. They
Right.
continue to
Not qualified, and there's not services for special education.
so
I
maybe
mean,
that,
it's a much larger,
Yeah.
it's a much larger, I mean, I think it's
and I don't know
next
if
to
it's just
Spark,
getting
but it's,
harder. I'm not
well, I mean, I think like Lisa said, it's a national issue. I was just in St. Louis, and this was a topic that came up, and there's tons of webinars about it, so it's a very real hot issue that's out there right now, and something that I think every state and program needs to wrestle with.
So I don't know if it needs to, I don't know where it needs to be captured, but I still believe you're taking some, or taking federal and state money, right? So I don't know, I know it's gonna come back to you guys, it's coming. So somewhere, maybe it's not in the rating, I don't know where it's gonna be, but, you're taking federal and state money, and the feds and the state are pushing for inclusion, and they're not saying you need to be things, but I'm saying somewhere through this, and the data, it should be captured, so they can go back and give that professional development to those teachers who haven't had the strategy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's coming back to you.
I wonder if it could be captured in proof of, like a policy level, as we're looking at meeting the standards, that they provide proof that they have got some kind of policy or practice around not suspending. I actually think we are addressing it at the state level. Don Barberis is convening a group, and it will be coming to the council. So I think in terms of Spark, whatever comes through the council as that policy in that direction will be what we can look at a minimum of putting in Spark, and then determine if there's anything above and beyond that, because as I said, it is a national topic, and one that, I mean, I think, to be honest, and I guess we're being recorded, but we're still there, it's okay. I mean, in order for the state plan, we didn't have a robust policy or statement as a state. So DHS put one in fairly so that we could take the time as a state to develop a comprehensive statement around that is really needed. So I think this conversation is really lending to the importance of that statement. So we can take this conversation back to Dawn and kind of fill her in and make sure that she's thinking about it from this lens as well.
that
Making sure the definition is really clear, because I think there are ways that people work themselves around it to get to the same outcome.
what it does say is that there'll probably, this is bubbled up here, that there might be other things that bubble up in the realm of childcare or preschool or services, early child care and education, and that maybe one of these areas is where it'll fall out. I mean, it seems to me that it really kind of falls out into continuous quality.
I would mention now that, I mean, we do ask for an inclusion statement in the QRIS. field test plan, and where I see it would fit now, although it would fit several places in the standards as far as implementing practices that really support kids, where it's probably most explicitly is in the family engagement, where it says that we have an inclusive environment. And I think it could easily, the policy that you're talking about, where it could easily be built in there, and I think it would come in with the continuous quality improvement to support programs that they could implement an inclusive policy or practice around not expelling.
And it also kind of goes back to the universal technical assistance, as these, I mean, today this bubbles up, and tomorrow it might be something else, that happens, children. Yes,
Melinda Benson, Inclusive Child Care Program, and they convene the Inclusive Child Care Committee. And, we met a couple weeks ago, Dawn Barberis is on that committee as well. And, they are sort of rethinking the committee, so now's a good time to join. The membership of that committee needs to expand, so, I would say reach out to Melinda Benson, and also maybe as direction for us to maybe check in with them.
Yeah, and I actually sat next to Melinda 2 days ago, and we had this very conversation about, because their scope has shifted a little bit, and it came up about what support and child care program can give to preschool promise providers.
We just have her.
So I
think she was supposed to get back to me.
Yeah, so I think it may be a little more
and it's
broad.
broader, but I do think that maybe it even, under some of these topics, though, we can be addressing that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something as we work on the book, speaking what those details are, like that's where some of that goes.
That's right, yeah.
And I really, if I can just expand a teensy bit on this, but, Lisa, I really appreciate you bringing up both as a specific issue, but I think it's also a little bit of an example of where, like you said, other things are gonna bubble up. And I'm thinking about our health partners and some of the conversations we have around best practices in health and childcare that we know are really tied to outcomes. But the cool thing, one of the many cool things about our QRIS is the standard is not it. So even if we don't see it specifically in this high-level standard, or even if something isn't specifically in an indicator, I think one of the genius of the way that TRI is conceptualized is the nimbleness we have to add specific values, concerns, priorities of the state in at any time. And that's just what you said, the universal technical assistance or the continuous quality improvement. And as we think about building out the continuous quality improvement resources, and I'm going to totally simplify it right now, but picture it beautifully, on the web, which again, we know doesn't solve access for every provider, but picture resources are on there and we say, wow, crisis in this realm. Let's make sure we have robust resources on that everybody can access. Let's talk to our professional development partners as the SPARK framework and say, what trainings do we need immediately? What do we need in terms of embedded coaching? So all the other places of SPARK that maybe aren't pieces of the standards, how nimble that is and how that can be built in. And so I think to me, that's really exciting in terms of being able to really pull in those other pieces where it doesn't necessarily fit in the standards. And I think those things will come up ongoing.
But the standard does address the overall topic, like the family relationships or that type of thing, so that gives us credit to go and look at that even further. Great. I do think that the work plan does evidently reflect a lot of things that we want to address, given the discussion here, and expand even more of that. So, the nice thing, I mean, I hear this as an issue, and it is an issue, but the nice thing is people are starting to address it instead of just saying, move on. We're not moving on, we're addressing it head on. So I think that's a real positive and a different mindset. Okay. Any other comments about this?
No, but I think we're done.
I know, we might get done on an early Friday.
Yes. The way we all started this morning, it might not be a bad thing.
Well, maybe that's a good mindset that we came with, and so. But any other comments about the work plan and knowing that we're clear to July of 2018? But look at all the value. I mean, look at the content of this is so rich, I'm going to give you shivers. Any other comments? Okay, so what I hear, we're going to do some messaging, though. We're going to get some messaging out before the new year about where we are now, and hopefully maybe something about what they can be doing in preparation for where we're going. And what else? And that we've identified that as things bubbled up, we've got some nimbleness in our process that we can address that. So I think that's a very positive aspect of this framework that we've created. And having the two-pager allows us to have that stability, and then the book allows us to have the information about how we're addressing each of those things. Any other things from today? I just want to be sure we're getting everybody's thoughts represented, because that's really the strength in this. This is so good because it's such a collective thought, and we've been able to move it forward in a positive way. I can't believe it. 10:30?
Yeah, and I want to just acknowledge the folks maybe that traveled to this meeting, and we're expecting a 3-hour meeting, and I was just planning on being here for the 3 hours, so I'm happy to stay, and if folks wanted to just talk to me about other things maybe that you've emailed me about, or whatever, I'm going to stay.
One thought I had about this discussion we've just had, that some of this needs to be popped off to the equity committee, because it's not just that, it's really an equity issue, you know, with some of this. Equity in our rural areas where they don't have resources, equity for our families who may not have resources. I know it's a sticky wiki, but it really is equity.
That's a really good, when you look at the ethnicity of the children being kicked out, it really is.
Oh, it's even more so?
Oh, yeah, so, but the state taking, I mean, we have to turn that data in every month to the Department of Education, so they're looking, at all of the data. So ethnicity, female, male, everything, that's all in there, right? And all the things that, all the strategies that have put in place to try to keep them there, how long did you try, I mean, they have all of that.
It's just that it shows that all these entities working together can address those issues. Because we'll come at it from different perspectives, and that's how we get a good comprehensive approach to solutions.
And Kristen in the chat box just wanted to mention she really appreciated you, Donalda, bringing it back to the messaging and how important that is.
Good. Well, thank you. And thank you for those who traveled. You did. The nice thing about
today, so it's all
Once you're in the area.
well, then it's always nice when you get an extra couple hours, whether it's, you know.
Bye, some friends, thanks for hanging in there. We didn't have Shauna here that does a really good job about reminding us to say our names, so I apologize for that.
Thank
Have a
you.
great weekend.